I'm Susan Yockey with VOA's Middle East Monitor. Coming up, U.S. presidential candidates fire verbal assaults at Iran. Can Iran follow through on a threat to close the Strait of Hormuz? Egypt's Muslim Brotherhood is in need of allies. And a look at the Egyptian security force raid on NGOs.
Under the former regime of Hosni Mubarak, there was definitely a targeting of civil society organizations, one organization, two organizations, but you never saw such a sweeping, widespread crackdown on NGOs.
It's ahead on VOA. But to begin, as we heard in the news, Iraqi officials say bomb attacks in the capital and in the south have killed at least 57 people and wounded more than 130 others. The deadliest attack today hit the southern city of Nasiriyah, where an explosion targeting pilgrims killed 30 people. Earlier in Baghdad, a pair of blasts hit the northern neighborhood of Sadr City. Officials say a bomb planted in a motorcycle exploded near a group of laborers who had gathered to seek work, followed by a roadside bombing a short time later. The explosions killed 12 people. Later in Kazimiya, another Shiite area in northern Baghdad, a pair of car bombings killed 15 people. The violence today comes just 2 weeks after a string of bombings killed at least 69 people across the capital. Those attacks followed the withdrawal of the last U.S. troops from Iraq amid increased political tensions in the country. Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki's Shiite-led government issued an arrest warrant last month for Sunni Vice President Tariq al-Hashimi, who has denied charges that he ran a death squad and has fled to the Kurdish north to avoid detention. The Sunni-backed Iraqi coalition has boycotted parliament and the cabinet, with leaders of the country's Sunni minority complaining that Mr. Maliki is monopolizing power in the hands of Shiites and excluding Sunnis from decision-making. The Turkish foreign minister is visiting Iran for talks that are expected to include the political crisis in their mutual neighbor Iraq, where the Sunni vice president has fled. Iraq's political tensions are causing Turkey to deepen its support for Iraq's Kurdish area. Dorian Jones reports from Istanbul.
The Kurdistan region in northern Iraq is at the center of a deepening political crisis, with Iraqi Vice President Tariq al-Hashimi taking sanctuary there from charges he led Sunni death squads against Shiite opponents, charges he denies. Iraqi Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki, a Shiite, has demanded the Iraqi Kurds hand over Hashemi. They have refused and are instead calling for talks to resolve the crisis. Turkish Foreign Ministry spokesman Selçuk Unal says Ankara strongly backs that stance.
TRG has asked for a national meeting concerning all Iraqi parties to discuss the recent developments, and we support that call. We have good relations with the KRG of Iraq, and we continue to do so. We will be continuing our relations, economic relations, and other political and social links.
Analysts say Ankara's strong support for the Kurdistan regional government is also affecting Turkey's deteriorating relationship with Iran. There are growing suspicions in Ankara that Tehran is behind the scenes orchestrating some of the political upheaval in Iraq so as to strengthen Shiite power there. Murat Bilhan, former Turkish ambassador and professor of international relations at Istanbul's Kültür University, says powerful economic forces are also driving the relationship between Ankara and the Kurdistan government. The region is believed to have massive energy reserves, and there is trade. Iraqi Kurdish leaders say about 60% of foreign companies operating in the region are Turkish. Former Turkish ambassador Bilhan.
Turkey has special interest in the Kurdish region, and it has special relations with them. We have exchanged visits, and they have come to Turkey to take advice and also to exchange views for future cooperation. So I think we have many things in common.
But Kurdish separatists, known as the PKK, operating in Turkey, often cross the border from bases in Iraqi Kurdistan. Turkish jets regularly bomb the area, targeting the separatists, drawing angry responses from the Iraqi Kurdish government. Soli Özel, a columnist for the Turkish newspaper Habertürk, who comments on foreign affairs, says economic interests ultimately outweigh threats to regional stability from the PKK.
The Kurds of Iraq said basically we cannot fight against the PKK, but we'll help you any other way we can. And Turkey will have to live with that restriction. But our trade with them is in billions of dollars. And the logic of geopolitics, the logic of history, the logic of maybe even sociology dictate that the Iraqi Kurds will have closer relations with Turkey than with Arab Iraq.
In his visit to Iran, the Turkish foreign minister is likely to bring up some of the thorny issues concerning neighbouring Iraq, and he's likely to reaffirm Turkey's ties with Iraqi Kurdistan. Dorian Jones for VOA News, Istanbul, Turkey.
Are you looking for a comprehensive daily look at events reshaping the Middle East? Visit voanews.com/ME. You'll find VOA's original reporting from the region, in-depth analysis from our Washington team, VIP interviews, online polls, photo essays, and mini documentaries. Bookmark us or add us to your RSS reader. That's voanews.com/ME.
Republican candidates competing for their party's U.S. presidential nomination are firing verbal assaults at Iran amid new tensions in the Persian Gulf. VOA correspondent Meredith Buell has details in this report from Washington.
Iran's military has sharply escalated its tone toward the United States as new economic sanctions appear to be taking a major toll on the country's economy. Iran recently completed naval exercises near the strategic Strait of Hormuz, a key transport route for Persian Gulf oil. Tehran is threatening to disrupt naval traffic through the strait if Western powers impose sanctions on Iran's oil exports. Republican presidential hopeful Mitt Romney is critical of the Obama administration's policies on Iran.
He failed to put in place crippling sanctions. He failed to stand with the dissidents in Iran when they took to the streets. And he's failed to put in place credible plans, military options to prevent Iran from having a nuclear weapon.
Western nations accuse Iran of trying to develop nuclear weapons under the cover of its civilian energy program, a charge Tehran denies. Republican presidential candidate Rick Santorum.
And I would be saying to the Iranians, you either open up those facilities, you begin to dismantle them and make them available to inspectors, or we will degrade those facilities through airstrikes and make it very public that we are doing that.
Analysts say that despite the Republicans' tough rhetoric on Iran, their positions are not much different from current U.S. policy. James Lindsay of the Council on Foreign Relations.
So there's a lot of pounding the table and identifying the threat. There's very little discussion about what exactly will be done.
Not all the Republican candidates favor military action against Iran. Congressman and anti-war advocate Ron Paul urges caution.
If we overreact and participate in bombing Iran, we're looking for a lot more trouble.
Analysts say presidential candidates frequently use foreign policy issues to demonstrate strength by saying they are willing to use America's military might to accomplish goals overseas. Jennifer Lawless teaches politics at American University.
Iran is an unknown, and we don't know what their nuclear capacity is. We don't know what they're actually going to do, and we don't know what the future will hold. So it provides a good opportunity for the Republican candidates to stake out hypothetical positions and try to convince voters.
Still, some Iranian Americans say the Republicans' sharp remarks are reckless. Jamal Abdi is the policy director for the National Iranian American Council.
What bellicosity, what saber-rattling gets you is this self-fulfilling prophecy, where we're talking about military options, we're talking about war.
Abdi hopes American policy on Iran will turn away from tougher sanctions and toward negotiations, a move he concedes is unlikely in an election year. Meredith Buell, VOA News, Washington.
Over the weekend, Iran said it test-fired several long-range missiles, which it said were capable of hitting U.S. and possibly Israeli targets. That has sent oil prices to their highest level in 8 months, since the Iranian military has declared it would close the strategic Strait of Hormuz. However, Patrick Clausen, the deputy director of the Washington-based Institute for Near East Policy, tells VOA's Paul Westphaling he has grave doubts that Iran can follow through on that threat.
Iran has a history of exaggerating what its weapon systems can do, and indeed are just simply lying, such as photoshopping pictures to indicate that a missile test was completely successful when it was only partly successful. That should make us very cautious about interpreting Iranian announcements about their missile tests. Until we have independent confirmation, we should simply say that this is what Iran claims it can do. And I do not have any independent knowledge that Iran has made false statements about the most recent tests, but I'm just cautious until I get independent confirmation. They have been known to release pictures that were later shown to have been launches done in other countries. They have also been known to release pictures of launches when, in fact, the pictures had been taken years earlier.
This, to me, would seem to be a case of exuberant comments about what they are capable of doing. We really don't know. Is that the case?
Correct. We know that they have a pretty impressive missile program and that they produce some pretty darn good missiles. But we also know that they've exaggerated the capabilities of their missiles and that they've had some failures. In fact, not so long ago, there was an explosion at a missile facility which killed the general who's been in charge of the missile program for 28 years since it got started, and a number of the scientists, senior scientists in the missile program. So Iran's had some failures and some successes.
This, to me, sounds like something North Korea would do in order to gain. They're trying to gain the respect of the international community, but they're not quite there yet. And this is a case of bravado?
Iran particularly wants to show that the explosion that killed the general who was in charge of the missile program and a number of other senior scientists did not set back their missile program. That's another reason for the current test.
Do you have any reason to believe that they can follow through on that threat concerning the Strait of Hormuz? Or is this, again, so much bravado?
Oil tankers are very hard to sink. They're great big, huge ships, and furthermore, for environmental reasons, they all have what are called double hulls, two separate hulls. However, U.S. Navy ships are much smaller and ironically, more vulnerable. So Iran might well be able to seriously damage or even sink a U.S. Navy ship. But to do the same to an oil tanker would be tough. You could inflict millions of dollars worth of damage on an oil tanker. Iran could inflict millions of dollars worth of damage on an oil tanker. But actually sinking it, no. And actually closing the strait to all the tankers that go through, I don't think so.
Analyst Patrick Clausen at the Institute for Near East Policy in Washington. VOA Middle East is building an online network of reporters, bloggers, and citizen journalists called VOA Middle East Voices, and it's only on Facebook. You're invited to send us news tips or submit your own story ideas. Post links to underreported stories on our wall. Participate in ambitious citizen journalism campaigns. Simply go to Facebook and search VOA Middle East Voices. Join the conversation. A leader of Egypt's Muslim Brotherhood says the group's Freedom and Justice Party is committed to working with others across the political spectrum, even as it appears poised to assume an outright majority in Parliament. But some people question if the pledge of pluralism is sincere or simply an attempt to spread responsibility for leading Egypt during troubled times. VOA's Elizabeth Arrett has details from Cairo.
There are two consistent and seemingly contradictory arguments made by the front-running party in Egypt's elections. One, that the Muslim Brotherhood will embrace everyone as it seeks to solve the nation's problems. And two, that the answer to those problems can be found in their slogan, Islam is the solution. The group's ideology is based on the premise that Islam is central to everything from family life to national government. But it's trying its best to counter any concerns that premise might carry for Egypt's Christians, secularists, and others should the Brotherhood win an outright majority after this week's third phase of voting. Essam Al-Arian, deputy head of the Brotherhood's Freedom and Justice Party, tells VOA that the FJP will not deviate from its stated commitment to democracy, even if it's at the expense of other Islamists, including the ultra-conservative Salafis.
We are not in a confrontation with any group, but still we stick to our democratic alliance with more than 10 parties representing all political factions in the country. The Salafists are respected because they have about 80 seats still now, and they can have more in the third phase. So we respect the choice of the people, but we are not going to change our alliance.
It's an uneasy alliance at best, given that FJP leaders, despite talk of inclusiveness, reject the idea of a woman or a Coptic Christian as president. But the Brotherhood has a long history of being practical. They built a massive following doing good works while being officially banned by the old government. And while they weren't the driving force behind last year's uprising, they have embraced its results. Ariane says more than anything, the FJP's agenda is now based on national unity, not ideology.
We are keen that the national solidarity which appeared on the revolution continued to build the country. So we are eager that all political blocs in the parliament work together according to a special agenda which put the utmost priorities of the people of Egypt prior than any political agenda.
Some observers believe that position speaks to another aspect of pragmatism. Egyptians have seen few concrete benefits since the revolution, and expectations are high that the new parliament can bring real change. Fahmi Hawedi, a columnist with the Shuruk newspaper, believes the Freedom and Justice Party may be trying to provide itself cover if progress is slow.
They think that they cannot carry the responsibility alone, and without the assistance of the other groups, which are either liberals or secularists, they cannot move. So all of them, they can carry the responsibility, and they used to say that there is no group, a single group can carry the responsibility in the coming future.
Perhaps the biggest challenge in the near term will be just how much authority any of the parties will be able to exert. The Brotherhood, for the most part, has stood by Egypt's interim military leaders, even as other elements have taken to the streets to call for them to step down. But cracks began to appear in recent months, especially over the writing of the new constitution. The military council had promised to leave that to a parliamentary committee, but now advocates a special advisory group that would let the generals have more say. It's a fight that's expected to come to a head in the next few weeks as the newly elected lower house of parliament convenes January 23rd. Whatever the Brotherhood's long-term attitude toward a broad-based, inclusive government, for now they'll need every ally they can get. Elizabeth Arrett, VOA News, Cairo.
When Egyptian security forces raided the offices of at least 10 non-governmental organizations last week, it shocked many both inside Egypt and abroad. Immediately came comparisons between Egypt's current military rulers and the previous regime of Hosni Mubarak. Reporter Rebecca Collard is joining us on the line, and she's been following this story. Hi, Rebecca.
Hi, how are you, Susan?
Fine, thank you. Thank you for asking. Say, has there been such a crackdown on civilian society organizations before in Egypt?
No, from most of the people that I talked to, they said no, never something quite like this. You know, under the former regime of Hosni Mubarak, there was definitely a targeting of civil society organizations, one organization, two organizations, but you never saw such like a sweeping, widespread crackdown on NGOs in the country.
Was there just Egyptian organizations raided?
No, among the organizations rated, and I think that for some people this was the most shocking, were three American organizations. Now, these organizations came out fairly quickly, condemning the raid, talking about the importance of this not happening again. So I think this was one of the more shocking aspects of the events last week.
Was there any indication about the reason for the raids?
Well, you know, since in the last few months, there has actually been a formal investigation into almost 30 organizations here in Egypt that the military rules say are receiving illegal foreign funds. So under the Egyptian Associations Law, which is basically the law that governs the NGOs and civil society organizations in Egypt, you have to register with the Ministry of Social Solidarity. So the accusation was that these organizations properly register with the Ministry of Social Solidarity, so they weren't able to receive foreign funds in this way. Now, that said, this investigation has been going on for months, and so this was the first kind of widespread action we've seen against these organizations.
From the civil society perspective, what do they think the motivation is for such actions against the organizations?
People in the civil society that work for such organizations told me, first of all, they think it's part of a wider-based kind of move to oppress dissidents and opposition and rights organizations. But also, I think one of the things that a few people I spoke to said was most scary was the fact that this idea that the military rulers have put forth again and again that these organizations are receiving foreign funds, that they're doing the work of foreign hands, that somehow they represent a foreign agenda rather than protecting Egyptians and Egyptian society. One of the women I spoke with said that they have been successful, that there has been animosity from the Egyptian public against some of these groups, feeling that they do have a foreign agenda.
Well, thank you, Rebecca, for chatting with us today.
No problem. Thank you, Susan.
That's reporter Rebecca Collard speaking with us from Cairo, Egypt. Qatar's Prime Minister says there have been some mistakes in the Arab League's observer mission in Syria. Prime Minister Hamad bin Jassim Al Thani discussed the mission Wednesday during a meeting with UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon, amid criticism from opposition groups who say the Syrian government is misleading the observers. Kuwait state news agency Kuna quoted the Prime Minister, who also leads an Arab League task force on Syria, as saying the mission is a first for the League and that the talks included what experience the United Nations could share. Arab League ministers are due to meet Saturday to review the observer team's assessment of whether the Syrian government is keeping a pledge to end a deadly crackdown on anti-government protesters. Opposition groups say the Syrian government has misled the monitors by taking them to loyalist areas, changing street signs to confuse them, and sending supporters into rebellious neighborhoods to give false testimony. Syrian state media said today the government released 552 prisoners who were involved in the unrest but did not take part in the killing of Syrians. Arab League Secretary General Nabil El-Arbi said earlier this week the observer mission is ensuring a halt to bloodshed and has secured the release of about 3,500 prisoners. He also reported that government forces had withdrawn from residential areas. But the head of the British-based Syrian Observatory for Human Rights said his contacts on the ground have not seen the release of detainees or the true removal of a military presence from the streets. The Syrian government Wednesday rejected U.S. accusations that it is failing to live up to its agreement with the Arab League. Washington said Syria is trying to provoke more violence to justify retaliation. A foreign ministry spokesman said those statements are offensive to the Arab League and a blatant interference in its work. As observers continued their efforts Wednesday, activist groups said security forces and pro-government militia shot dead at least 10 people in central Homs province. The Syrian opposition has sharply criticized the observer mission, saying it allows President Bashar al-Assad to continue cracking down on the rebellion against his 11-year autocratic rule. Rights groups have expressed increasing concern that monitors are unprofessional and lack experience. The United Nations estimates that more than 5,000 people have been killed since March in the Syrian government's crackdown on protests, inspired by the Arab Spring democracy movement. Damascus says it is fighting Islamist militants directed from abroad that have killed at least 2,000 of Mr. Assad's forces. Afghan President Hamid Karzai is demanding that the U.S. detention center at Bagram Air Base be transferred fully to the Afghan government's control within a month. Mr. Karzai issued the order today after hearing a briefing on a report detailing what his office called many cases of violations of the Afghan constitution and other applicable laws of the country and of the relevant international conventions and human rights. The President has tasked a high-level commission to oversee the transfer of both the detention center and prisoners held by foreign forces exactly 1 month from today. This has been VOA's Middle East Monitor. Join us Monday through Friday for news from the region and of interest to the region. Coming up on International Edition, should lethal force be used against pirates? Britain is looking for a ruling. Thanks for tuning in to the Voice of America.
For more on the stories you've heard on our radio programs, visit our website at voanews.com. That's where you'll find in-depth reports, related stories, videos, and more from our team of correspondents. Or take the news with you by downloading podcasts of your favorite VOA program. That's at voanews.com.
voanews.com.
Online news for a changing world.